We were so confident in the precision revolution and the ability of air power to kill leaders through this 5-ring targeting. We were so confident we didn't come in with a backup plan. And my argument has always been, okay, you tell me you're right. Maybe Professor Pape is wrong, that for the first time in history, maybe your plan is really going to work. And I've been saying this for 30 years, okay? And I'm saying all I'm asking is bring some backup in case, just in case you're wrong. Because if you don't, you're going to create a catastrophic situation. And that is what's happened here. And this may end up being, Chris, in the current situation, the most catastrophic smart bomb trap failure of air power we've ever seen.
Hello and welcome to Why Is This Happening with me, your host, Chris Hayes. I'm speaking to you on Wednesday, March 18th, which is midway through the third week of the U.S. and Israeli war on Iran. By the time you hear this, it'll, I guess, be the fourth week, or it will have stopped, in which case it'll be a different listening experience. I don't know. Seems to me this could stop any day, or it could go on for weeks or months or years. I remember the first days of the Afghanistan war when, the country was incredibly united behind that effort. I was 22 years old, and in the probably like 5% of Americans that didn't think the war was a good idea, 5 or 10%, depending on the polling. And, that lasted 20 years. So who knows? The thing that has characterize this war so far is that it has been a incredibly intense, sustained air war by both U.S. and Israeli forces on Iranian targets. And I don't think there's any question about the total sort of military superiority of both American and Israeli forces when it comes to this kind of thing, using an array of different tools in their arsenal, actual planes flying and dropping bombs, Tomahawk missiles, which can launch from very far away and hit targets. I think we've been using some drones as well. There's a whole complicated bunch of tools that have been used. Thousands of targets have been hit, including, military installations and ballistic missile launchers, as well as a school that little girls were going to school in the first day of the war, maybe 150 to 200 children killed. The supreme leader of Iran, and then subsequently other political leaders of Iran. And there's this question that hangs over the war, that kind of hangs over all of the wars the U.S. wages, which are actually a lot of them in my lifetime, is the notion of ground troops. Like, the U.S., I think we've so internalized U.S. air power superiority that it just doesn't count as a war until there are, quote, boots on the ground or ground troops. And I think that's worth sort of spending some time thinking about and interrogating even in the course of today's discussion, because I think it allows for lots of U.S. death and destruction all around the world, without us thinking much about it or thinking that we're in a war, because we can, fire a missile or drop a bomb or have a drone kill someone. But now there's this question of whether ground troops will be deployed. There's news that a Marine Expeditionary Force, up to 5,000 U.S. Marines are on their way. There's talk about special forces going in to secure enriched uranium. There's also talk about the question of what the war could achieve if you don't actually have, quote, boots on the ground. And so there's a bunch of really interesting both strategic and political questions bound up in this. And so I wanted to talk to someone today who sort of made it its life's work to think about this and to write about it and research it. He's a political science professor named Robert Pape. We actually had him on All In early in the war. He teaches at the University of Chicago. He specializes in international security affairs. He's written and read and thought a lot about two related issues, both air war, air superiority, and also asymmetric warfare and what we call terrorism, or civilian directed violence. And he's been writing a lot about this war on the Substack that he runs called The Escalation Trap. Professor Pape, it's great to have you in the program.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It was great to be on with you before, and I like your opening quite a bit because I've been thinking a lot about those issues for quite some time.
Can we maybe let's start on that? This distinction, this idea of ground troops, like boots on the ground, that there's this kind of like, it's almost like there's like the minor leagues and there's the major leagues, right? It's like you're playing professional baseball in AAA is different than like being a professional baseball player or college basketball. That like, we obviously fired a strike that killed Qasem Soleimani, for instance, in the first Trump administration. There were strikes against Syria in the first Trump administration. There have been strikes in, I think, over a dozen countries in what's called the global war on terror. And somehow they like occupy this different category in the 21st century American consciousness than war and boots on the ground. How recent is that as this distinction?
I could actually date this pretty precisely, Chris. So I was a graduate student in the 1980s at the University of Chicago. I thought I was going to go into the Foreign Service. So I wanted to understand how we lost the Vietnam War with so much power, military power, air power. So that's how I wrote a dissertation on coercive air. So this was in 1988. And here I am. I'm thinking I'm just going to do a quick little postdoc at the University of Michigan. And what happens? The Cold War ends. And what happens immediately when the Cold War ends? The first Gulf War occurs. So right away, I realized that because air power, with the precision, what it offers is the idea that you can gain inordinate political power, both against your enemy at home and domestically at home, your enemy abroad and domestically at home, and at low cost. Your pilots won't have to face as many risks. There's not the hope is you'll win without the messy ground war, so you won't have the ground war costs. So what I realized is we were going to head into an age of precision air power. So what I started with as a idea, do this dissertation, head off to the Foreign Service, I then realized this was a much different road for me. I already had spent years studying this problem. I then spent more years and really dedicated large hunks of my life to this. And it wasn't planned. It's because I then realized I had something to say about it. I had something to warn about it, that this tool, this air power tool, was going to be seductive. It was going to be attractive, and it was going to get us into trouble. Bigger trouble than leaders anticipate. And I end up being called by the U.S. Air Force in the middle of the Gulf War in 1991. Think about this. We've got pilots bombing Baghdad, and they call me, Professor Pape, a postdoc, a young kid at the University of Michigan, and say, hey, will you come and interview? We want to build a whole new school for the Air Force around air strategy, and we'd like you to be one of our first 10 professors. Here I am. I'm not a military. I had no military background, and I'm being asked to go and do this. And so I then told my family, we're going to actually have to move to Montgomery, Alabama, because I have this opportunity to not just sort of teach and get a job and a paycheck, but to actually try to explain the real limits and opportunities with this new tool. And that then led me into discussions with the Chief of Staff of the Air Force on how do we use air power to end the Bosnian Civil War. That led me, Chris, into big debates with the Leadership Decapitation School, which was just building. John Ward, he was my boss at Maxwell Air Force Base. There's a whole set of stories about that here, and I became the key alternative to the leadership decapitation. And that was debating inside of the U.S. Air Force. We had classified debates on Easter, where generals don't like going into Easter, going into work on Easter, giving up their families to listen to some people debate, including a civilian kid like me. Think how young I was at the time. And here we are having these classified SITK debates. And what happened here is that led to the what's called deliberate force, September 1995, the bombing strategy that ended the civil war in Bosnia, stopped the genocide, I was advising the exact target here, and what you saw here was not leadership decapitation, which frustrated the leadership decapitation school, and I can guarantee you they did not like that in the Air Force. What you saw was my other concept here of hammer and anvil. This is in my book, Bombing to Win. It lays out how you use air and ground power together here, and we worked with the Muslim Croatian ground offensive. That is how you stop the Bosnian Civil War. So for me, this wasn't just an academic thing. This wasn't just getting a paycheck. I saw, as a very young person here, opportunities to really make a difference with these ideas. And I saw that even in the Air Force, which you would not expect. Why would they listen to a young 30-year-old kid, right? I mean, think about that. I'm debating 4-star generals here. I'm debating people with all of this experience. And what's happening? The Air Force really was trying to figure out how to actually save lives in Bosnia for real. And that's what we ultimately did. And then that led to all the other work that I've done and all the other things I've done.
So just to go back to this sort of that original moment in the Persian Gulf War, I remember the term that was used then was smart bombs. That was a new term.
Yep.
And what I hear from you is that there really is a real change. There's like an actual technical change, which is if we think about the Blitz, if we think about the bombing of London, or we think about Dresden, right? There are targets, but it's quite indiscriminate. It's horrible for civilian populations, and over time, what happens is the capability to take either a bomb or a missile and basically say, we want to have it hit this target and only this target, rapidly develops. And the Persian Gulf War is the place where we really first see it being used at that level. Is that right?
Yeah, let me give you a quick little, this will only take a minute, to explain the change in accuracy of bombing over time. You see, air power starts with balloons, actually, just before World War I, morphs into then those fighter jets. And once you're in a balloon or a fighter jet, you're doing reconnaissance. Then you realize, let's throw a grenade at the other side. That's how bombing actually began. Then what happened is we built bombers, and especially in the 1930s. Well, the bombers in the 1930s, especially British original bombers, they were able to hardly find the target. They couldn't even find the city unless it was at night, where the city lights would help guide them to a city.
Wow, yeah.
Then they had dumb bombs, and their dumb bombs, I'm just trying to, it'll only take a minute. And their dumb bombs were so bad, their night bombs, half of them would miss the target by 5 miles. Think about that. We come along, and we're the Americans with technology. We developed a Norden bomb sight here, and our bomb sight in World War II was able to put half of the bombs within 1,000 feet. And we thought that was precision. Half bombs in 1,000 feet of the target. That's why we don't bomb Auschwitz, by the way, because if we would have taken that amount of accuracy, you would have killed probably 30,000 Jews in order to destroy the ovens at Auschwitz. So that's a whole nother story. So now, fast forward to the precision age, and I'll skip over a lot. We can certainly find the cities, okay? We can find even huge buildings. That's what happens with satellites. What then happens is we get laser-guided bombs, ultimately GPS bombs, where we can find the targets, see the targets with these other sensors, and that means if it's visible, and then we can also put the bomb within about 5 meters 80 to 90% of the time, and that is what creates the illusion, not just the accuracy that is true, it's real, but the illusion of control over future escalation. Because think about this. Imagine, Chris, you yourself are sitting in those briefings, and I've been there, where the generals with the stars are going up to the wall with the PowerPoint presentation, and they're guaranteeing various people like speakers of the House and other very important people, and you're right there. Let's say you're the Speaker of the House, and you're getting this briefing. You're not only seeing that you can hit that target the way the briefer is telling you, but you're already in the back of your mind thinking, I can control this tool. I've got this tool. And then you see that, well, why wouldn't publics be positive about this? I'm going to give them a free lunch. I'm going to solve a problem at least some of them want solved. There'll be no extra costs, silver bullet, and what's going to happen is I'm going to coast into the next election. So you've got a combination of things happening.
Right. So the incredible increase in precision and accuracy at a technical level produces an illusion of control.
Yes.
It becomes this very seductive tool because it seems like all benefit and no cost. Obviously, the cost is high because it's costing us $1 billion or $2 billion.
And the cost is on people we say are evil or bad and ...
Exactly. Yes, I was just about to add that. Right. So exactly, like the cost to us is low.
That's right.
The cost is happening somewhere else where the bombs fall, which we've seen. I mean, the first day of the war we saw with just horrific clarity, and so. You can see how, and I've seen this my whole life. Like this, the temptation to use this tool is so great, because it solves for a bunch of problems, and yet it's also created a lot of disasters.
This is why, Chris, people think, oh, this is just a Republican problem. Bill Clinton, I was in the 1990s. My goodness, the amount of use of air power here with Bill Clinton here. And then you look Barack Obama, the drone wars and so forth. And a lot of what I've been trying to do, and the reason I've given advice to every White House from 2001 to 2024 is because a lot of these frameworks and things we're talking about, a lot of what I do is talk about the hidden counterproductive consequences that you're not intending. I'm not saying Bill Clinton intends to cause civilian death. That's not it. But there are many unintended effects of this, because you also think I can put those bombs closer to targets in cities. And that's what you see. When you take a 500-pound bomb and you're focusing on hitting a target in a city, you can misidentify the target. That's how the girls' school got killed, burned to death, to almost 200. But you can also have ripple effects where you knock down buildings in the whole city block. And it's because, just like on 9/11, you shake those buildings, they come down.
You just mentioned, I want to just stay on something you mentioned before we sort of move to what's happening now in Iran. Which is a good segue, which is you talked about the decapitation debates, which seems quite relevant here. We have experienced a sort of a decapitation of a regime in Venezuela that was the preamble to Iran, in which U.S. air power and special forces were used to actually go into the country and forcibly, essentially abduct, arrest the leader, taken out of the country. He's now sitting in a detention center a few miles from where I'm talking to you. And on the first day of the Iran war, there was a massive decapitation strike that killed the supreme leader, as well as, I think, dozens of members of the sort of upper echelons of the regime. And then subsequently, there have been subsequent strikes on other leaderships, including the figure who is seen as sort of the largest secular authority, non-cleric authority, who was just killed in an Israeli airstrike. Will you walk me through what the contours of the, quote, decapitation debate
that's right.
we're having back then and continue to now?
And it's still the same. It really hasn't changed. Now, of course, technology has changed. We have B-2s, we have slightly different bombs. But here's the key thing to know about the decapitation paradigm, and this is in my book, Bombing to Win, if folks want to know about it. It's John Warden invented what he called as the 5-ring theory. And think about it as an archery target, where the center ring is the leadership node itself. So think of this as the supreme leader and so forth. Then the next outer ring is their command and control nodes, how they then communicate and so forth. And then the next outer ring beside that are their critical infrastructure like oil. Okay, so that's the third ring. And then the fourth ring is usually psyops, by the way. And the psyops that's psychological operations for the population. This would be President Trump's speeches here and Netanyahu's speeches. These are coordinated. And then the fifth ring would be the military, but the military they're talking about is always the offensive missile capability of the opponent, not the actual military capability, not the whole million-man army. You see what I mean? That five-ring theory is the fuller description of leadership targeting. And the idea here is it started as in 1991 with a plan called Instant Thunder. And we have been using that five-ring model ever since. Okay. He's now retired, but this is the key model. And what I debated was why that would not just fail, but typically fail disastrously. His idea, John Warden's idea, was much like, and this is what he pitched to the higher ups.
Is John Warden another academic?
Oh, no, he's a colonel in the Air Force. So he was a key colonel in the Air Force, much like Billy Mitchell. So there's a whole history of air power advocates from within inside the Air Force. And so his name was John Warden, Colonel John Warden. He was a colonel, and he was the advocate of how with precision bombs you could finally have air power alone win wars. And the goal was you win with air power alone. You don't move any backup forces here, because what you want to do is you want to be the commander in chief. No more Army generals on top of Air Force generals here. This is going to be air power, no jointness. This was really air power. So this would be good bureaucratically for the Air Force. He believed it would win wars. He used to liken it to General MacArthur with this famous Inchon landing here that he tried and failed disastrously, by the way, ultimately. But the bottom line is this is the logic, Chris. It's like an archery target, and what's missing is they're doing nothing to stop the lash back capability. That's what I focus on. Stage one, my argument to them always was, you will destroy those targets. You will hit 90+% of those targets. The problem is not that you can't hit the targets. The problem is you're underestimating the politics that this is going to inject. You're going to change the game politically to our disadvantage, because the enemy now is going to be more angry and more mad at you and more willing to take risks to their own lives to kill you back. And then you haven't done anything to blunt their ability to lash back, so you're going to get lashing back. And that's how with the Clinton administration, March 99, I'm not trying to pick on Clinton, but March 99, he bombs Milosevic for 3 days in March 99. 51 targets in and around Belgrade, including Milosevic's home. What happens? Milosevic and Serbs lash back. They send an army into Kosovo, their army. They cleanse 1 million Kosovars, civilians from Kosovo. That's 50% of the population are knocked out. And we're in a gigantic crisis here for months and months and months here. And it's because we had no tool. We were so confident in the precision revolution and the ability of air power to kill leaders through this 5-ring targeting. We were so confident we didn't come in with a backup plan. And my argument has always been, okay, you tell me you're right. Maybe Professor Pape is wrong, that for the first time in history, maybe your plan is really going to work. And I've been saying this for 30 years, okay? And I'm saying all I'm asking is bring some backup just in case you're wrong. Because if you don't, you're going to create a catastrophic situation. And that is what's happened here. And this may end up being, Chris, in the current situation, the most catastrophic smart bomb trap failure of air power we've ever seen.
Okay, so that brings us to, I want to start with, I have been trying very hard, working on myself to distinguish between two things with this war. How I feel about the war's justification, whether it was justified, whether it's morally defensible, whether it's politically wise, whether it's constitutionally permissible, whether it's strategically wise, right? all of those I think are bad. Like, I don't think it's constitutionally permissible. I don't think it's morally permissible. I don't think it's strategically wise in the long run. Like, and how it's going day to day, because I think there's a tendency to conflate the two. And there's also a lot of propaganda and a lot of fog of war stuff, right? So it's like, I'm just trying to be clear on, like, it does seem the case that the UN and Israel have tremendous superiority, that they have massively degraded a lot of the faculties and capabilities of the Iranian armed forces, that at a military level, the avenues for retaliation for the Iranians have been constrained. They have fewer tools at their disposal. And that the big tool that they do have, the huge pressure point, is the price of oil and constraining global chemical supply, not just oil, but all petrochemicals, aluminum, fertilizer, natural gas, etc. That's my read of where things are right now, which seems to me like, okay, like the planners came up with a decent plan in this sort of near-term sense, but there's just a big unasked question. There's a big unanswered question, which is like, well, okay, now what?
That's right.
How does that work as a schematic?
Yeah, so what you actually did, Chris, you started talking about the moral issue and got more into the escalation dynamics that I love to talk about. But let's talk about the moral issue for a moment and really focus on that, because that's not been something yet that I've been on many, many conversations here. But here's the thing. I agree that this is a morally awful regime. I am not here to defend this regime in Iran whatsoever. They just butchered something like 30,000 of their civilians, piled up the bodies. There's no doubt about that. But just think about this for a moment. So when we say that we are in a morally just war, we need to realize, though, that just because this is an evil opponent, we need to realize they may, with their capability, do more evil things. That what they've done so far is not the limit of their evil. It may be just the beginning of their evil, you see. So when we attack an evil enemy, we need to recognize we may be creating opportunities for that enemy to hurt us and do more evil in the world, which is what I think is happening. So just because we had a good intention doesn't mean that we don't see. And what are you seeing with the lashing back of the Iranian here? This has caused, 50, 70,000 Americans to scurry out of the, you're seeing enormous costs already, and we haven't even barely started this.
And I just want to interject something from my own, just speaking for myself here. I don't think there's any morally laudatory intention to the war itself, because I don't think that Donald Trump actually cares about the dignity and self-determination of the Iranian people. In fact, I think it's quite clear from the Venezuela escapade that that's the last thing he cares about, because Venezuelans have been groaning under the yoke of a very repressive government that's very corrupt, that has done terrible things to that country, including making it a very difficult place to live and to dissent. And he loves the number two that he has made buddies with, and because we're diverting their oil. So like, there's just zero, you cannot credit that there's any motivation here that's motivated in any way by the nature of this regime. And I'm not saying you are.
I am with you 100% on this, but I'm pointing out that because I have a lot of conversations of people saying, I'm not a Trump supporter, but isn't this a moral war, Bob? Isn't this the morally, that's a bad enemy and we should go hurt him? And my point to them is what we have done is had such a bad approach that we're making, there is now more evil in the world than there was. And that's the only point I want to make on the moral front here.
Well, I just want to say one more thing on this, because I think it's,
it's an important conversation.
I've lived the last 20 years. And so like, I think, if comparing, I don't know, the Olympics of badness, evil is sort of a theological word, but I think Saddam was worse than the Iranian regime. I mean, I think, that was that was one of the worst. I mean, that was a totalitarian state. There, Iran has its own version of civil society. It obviously represses dissent, but there's Ba'athist Iraq was, I think, probably a worse regime. also, it turns out that like that war killed hundreds of thousands of people. It unleashed ISIS onto the world, which everyone's kind of memory hold. Gaddafi's regime was pretty bad, and the Libyan aftermath has been like, you know, this is an obvious point, but like unintended consequences and a bad regime.
And don't forget the Shah of Iran. So in 1953, the CIA took control of parts of the Iran military to topple Mossadegh, the democratic leader of Iran. And we installed the Shah with the Savak. And your listeners can go Google Savak, and they're going to see one of the most brutal secret agencies, all that political torture. So it's not like we just put in a Thomas Jefferson in 1953. We took out Thomas Jefferson to put in a Joe Stalin.
And so all of the sort of moral objections here, and I'm glad that we spent some time on them because it is important to me and I talk about it on the show, but let's just sort of put those to the side for now and just talk about, in a sort of game theory, we have two adversaries, you know, they're going at each other. They're making calculations, largely rational, I think, about what to do. And one clearly has more cards to play. But also, and this is another sort of dynamic here, you know, in the end, why did the Taliban outlast the U.S.? And the answer was, it's their country. They were going to always be there.
That's right.
We went there and could leave, but they can't. So, like, that's the other asymmetry here.
Yeah, so game theory is really great. I spend a lot of time with game theory, as a lot of academics do, and I expect a lot of listeners here. And they understand it's a strategic interaction. You have A and B, and their strategies interact, and that can lead to then perverse outcomes. But there's something that's now, let's go to graduate level game theory, okay? So that's like undergraduate level game theory, prisoner's dilemma, all that. Everybody will start to know that from school. But let's now go to graduate school. In graduate school, you've got Thomas Schelling level game theory. Thomas Schelling says what you can have in a process of escalation here is that strategic interaction cross a key threshold that's a focal point. And when you cross those focal points, you get a very dramatically different set of outcomes. He calls them equilibrium states. Very dramatically different. And what I do in my escalation trap discussion is I say, this is what I mean by when the smart bombs hit, they're tactically successful, strategically ineffective, but they do more. They actually change politics inside of the target. They're a game changer. Right. There's a threshold in game theory that has been crossed, which mathematically allows for dramatically worse outcomes. That's that's very advanced game theory. That's what we're seeing play out in the escalation trap.
So if we're talking about one of my favorite books of all time, Robert Axelrod's Evolution of Cooperation, which is about game theory and actually
he was there at University of Michigan when I was there, and oh my God, he supported my book. He supported my oh my God.
That, by the way, this is a very short book. It's one of the most profound books I've ever read. It's actually got a chapter on the infamous World War I trench truce, and how it evolved. But if you're talking about, you know, this sort of, let's say, iterated prisoner's dilemma, or you and I are playing against each other, and just to sort of hammer home the point you're making, what we might think of as kind of linear escalation. I do a thing, you do a thing, I do a thing. And what you're saying is, Schelling's point is that there's basically non-linear escalation, right? There's thresholds at which things exponentially go up, where you're now in a completely different world because of what felt like we were playing a game theory game back and forth, tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. Someone does something that then moves us to a place where now a whole bunch of new options are on the table. And Schelling, of course, is thinking about this in the context of developing the first nuclear nuclear strike policy, which is like, are we going to avoid all annihilating each other? So this is a very important issue for him and that cohort of intellectuals.
You've got it, Chris. That's why I teach Schelling to this day in my strategy class. That class where I've modeled the bombing of Iran for 20 years, we spend time with Schelling. We spend time understanding the escalation dynamics here. When I taught for the Air Force, I realized the most important book was Thomas Schelling's Arms and Influence. And what I tell my class is that the one book they should take when they become National Security Advisor is Thomas Schelling. PAPE is number 2. So they and I think, and I believe I sold more books for
That's saying
Thomas
something.
Schelling. Well, I'm telling you, I think, and I criticized Thomas Schelling in my book, Bombing to Win. He wasn't so happy, but I worked with him so much, he ended up blurbing my third book, Chris. And I think I ended up selling more books for Tom Schelling than Tom Schelling did. And this is what is missing here, is understanding these escalation dynamics. That's why I wanted to do the Substack, because I really believe that this is really intelligible by more than just my students. It really can be done. And what we're showing right here is it can, in fact, be done quite well. And your point about the nonlinear ratcheting effect of the escalation is right. And that's why stage 1 is dangerous of the trap. It's a trap. It's a ratchet up. Stage 2 is dangerous. That's a bigger ratchet up. We're now on the cusp of stage 3, which may be the biggest ratchet of all, with the ground force options. And this is also something that we really need to understand. So people think, well, sure, we tried this, it didn't work. We'll just keep going up the escalation ladder. It's a ratchet up. And this is changing the game against us at every ratchet.
One of the ways that people, when you make this point, which I think is so important, right, which is that we can't just think in terms of, in this narrow column of how is this doing militarily because they have political effects, and ultimately there's feedback between political leadership and mechanisms and military, the choice of military tactics and the choice of response and escalation by the adversary. So an example of that is, first day of the war, decapitation. The supreme leader is killed. A bunch of other people are killed. By the way, I don't know how much you think like emotion matters in all this, but the supreme leader's son, like his father, mother, and wife were all killed in the same strike.
On a micro level, this is the thing we can't model very well in political science. But what this is akin to is, remember, the second Bush president had wanted to get revenge for Saddam trying to kill his father here. So these issues where we've killed the new supreme leader, his dad was the old supreme leader. That was his dad. Yep. We killed his mother. We killed his wife. We killed his son, and we killed a daughter. So this is, if we're ever going to find a guy, he also fought on the front lines in the Iran-Iraq war. So he's got his street cred here pretty severely, pretty well demonstrated. So this is somebody who's not likely to wimp out on Iran.
So so one example of the unintended consequences is just like the personal motivation you might give the new leader, who is now, I think we can all understand, probably quite enraged the United States for what it's done. And then there's the strike that killed Ali Larijani, who, was sort of seen as the person who in this interim period of the war was kind of the chief secular power holder, close to the Iranian, the Guard. He was someone who had been active in advising the supreme leader. A lot of people saw him as like a possible person that on the other side of some de-escalatory talks or peace talks or resolution could be the interlocutor on the other side because of the credibility. So now he's gone. So in that sense, that feels like a perfect example of like, okay, there's going to be some consequences to that we don't know, right? Like politically, which is who's anyone going to talk to if and when you want to resolve this through some peace negotiations that are the end of the war.
Well, and what you're demonstrating, Chris, is what I call the illusion of control. So you can just imagine if you've got information where you're eavesdropping on communications, you're doing all kinds of satellite triangulation, you've got coordinates, you've got some human as well, you start to have the illusion of, I can actually stack this deck. You see what I mean? What you're forgetting about is politics, because there is a political change that's occurring. And if you to get a new air power for 100 years, I want to keep saying this, has never produced positive regime change alone. What you get is either the same type of regime or a lashback, more dangerous regime. And the reason is because it changes politics, this ratchet effect, not just simply triangulating that exquisite intelligence that only you are seeing because it's so exquisite here. And that is this mesmerizing mesmerizing illusion of precision control. But what we're facing now is we're about to cross that next ratchet, possibly. I don't know if President Trump will do it, but when we do the ground forces, if we do a ground operation, this is going to have two effects on politics. Number one, there's a good chance we're going to see a lot of our forces killed, maybe not all of them. Maybe they'll win the battle, but it'll be more like Saving Private Ryan. And that is going to create a lot of sympathy inside of the body politic here for those dead Americans who died for us. Maybe a bad idea, but they still died for us. It's also then going to create politics inside of Iran where they're going to start to become fearful. If we're going to do what we call a limited ground operation, they're not going to believe it's limited. If we start to go on the ground and take even just Karj Island, they're not going to believe it's going to stay at Karj Island. Why would it? We've said regime change, and this is now creeping into regime change. So you're going to start to get resistance here organized, maybe even independently of the regime. We're all thinking it's the regime kind of tightly micromanaging everything, and I think with the drones they probably are. But once you go on the ground here, you're going to end up likely producing resistance not on day one, but over time. And that's my big work on terrorism, Chris, that we haven't talked about. After 9/11, compiled the first database on all suicide attacks around the world. Israel didn't have this. America didn't have this. And it shows, and I published 2 books on it. One is Dying to Win. Yep. And it shows that 95% of all suicide attacks are triggered by ground forces, foreign ground forces, military presence. That is, there may be some bad now, but this will increase it 20 times. And that led me to predict if we invade, occupy Iraq, this will touch off the largest suicide terrorist campaign of modern times, which happened, and I predicted it before it happened. And that is how my name became well known inside of the U.S. government. How did I end up doing a lot of that connection with those different White Houses? It's because inside the folks who really know this, they know about Pape's predictions here that have been going on in the past. Now the public is starting to hear it. And it's not classified. I wasn't in a classified realm. My point is that this is now, if we start on the ground here, we're really going to start to set off a hornet's nest. And that hornet's nest in Iraq went on for 15 years. That's how we got ISIS. ISIS did not exist until we produced it like Frankenstein's monster.
This point about ground troops is the next step here. When you talked about, modeling bombing Iran for 20 years. And obviously this is a thing that I remember when, the John McCain, singing it to the tune of Barbara Ann in the 2008 campaign. I remember there was talk when Bush was reelected that they were going to, this was when they were still sort of heady with the supposed success of the Iraq war, that they were going to go after regime change in Iran. And Ariel Sharon, in fact, was telling Bush at that point, the then Israeli prime minister, that Bush had sort of changed the wrong regime. When you do the modeling, do the steps go like this? In that, basically, you use your superior air power, it doesn't produce the outcome you want. They still have leverage, and then you realize that to get the outcome you want, you have to go to ground troops, and then you go to ground troops. Basically, that's the escalation trap.
That's the escalation trap, and there's a ratchet effect. You keep getting pulled deeper in. Now, some presidents stop, and sometimes the ground force threat is enough to get the other side to pull back. In the case of Milosevic in '99, what happened is we did the air campaign. That was a disaster. It produced the ethnic cleansing of 1 million Kosovar civilians and killed thousands of them. Then we put in the army here, 40,000 ground forces. That's what led Milosevic to give up. And then we backed off. We said, fine, as long as you're just going to back off here, we're going to be all done with you and we'll walk away. Well, here the problem is that we have a worse problem, Chris, which is right now, if President Trump cuts a deal with Iran, there's no reason to think they're giving up the control of the Persian Gulf, the Hormuz. And right now, that's 20% of the world's oil. and price of oil. So what does that mean? They control 20% of the world's oil. Right now, they are the only state that is actually exporting oil through the Persian Gulf. They're exporting 14 of their tankers, or tankers with their oil, maybe flagged by India and others, have gone through the strait since the war began. That's about $1 billion to $1.5 billion in their hands, mostly in Chinese banks. They're making money on this war. They have then shut down the oil flows by the UAE and others. So they're gaining money and relative power here. And so the idea that we're going to cut this deal somehow and walk away and they're going to give up all of this power here, they may even be glad to promise they'll give it up. But the bottom line is, how are we going to make them stick to this giving up the Persian Gulf? You see, so I really think this is why I've been arguing for a long time. You don't want to start down this road, because at each ratchet, it gets more and more difficult. And now I still would say Trump should cut the deal, by the way. But the bottom line is, yes, we are in a we're getting in a hole. It's getting deeper, and digging it deeper is not going to make it easier to get out of.
Let me push on this for a second. So, the Strait of Hormuz is one of these things that, again, like, I feel like, anyone who has read the news knows about it. It knows that it's a key point of geopolitical leverage for Iran, which is why it's been bewildering to watch Donald Trump apparently discover this. Obviously, he was briefed on it, and I think, either wasn't paying attention, had one of those things where he was resting his eyes during that part of the briefing, or didn't care, or steamrolled past it, or whatever. But I guess my question is, but that leverage existed before this war? So why is it worse than the status quo ante? The best case, right, is like, we degraded their ballistic missiles, we reduced the ability they can threaten, and now we are going to cut some deal, and Donald Trump can just declare victory about anything. He's walked away from things before, and they now have to reset with a bunch of their leadership class gone, a bunch of their military capabilities kicking out. And yes, they have leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, but they did before. So what's worse now?
They only had leverage over 4% of the world's oil before. So Iran exports about 1 million barrels of oil a day. That's about 4% of the world's oil. What happened in this case is the war itself and that horizontal escalation, the drones, the mines, what that has done is given them control over another 16% of the world's oil. That's Saudi oil, UAE oil, the other oil.
The point is that Strait of Hormuz control was sort of more theoretical than actual, and the war forced it to become actual. Meaning
that's exactly right.
They physically control it now. Yeah.
Yes, and their threat and the risk and the pilots, the people piloting those tankers want a paycheck, not to eat a drone. So you're not going to get many of them, no matter what the insurance is. You could pay them like $200 million. They're still, why are they dying to go through the Strait of Hormuz? They're not. So that's why this is quite a bit of leverage for Iran, and they can use this leverage in a lot of ways. They can leverage it also with India. They can maybe leverage it, work with Russia even more to modulate the price of world oil. And for them, the more the price of world oil goes up, the more money's going in their coffers. Now you'll say, well, why don't we just bomb their tankers? Because that will take another 4%. You see, now we're just ratcheting up the price of oil even more.
That doesn't. Right. Yes. There's lots of things you could. Right. Exactly. And in fact, one of the interesting things is that, people have predicted, Spencer Ackerman wrote a piece on this, and many people have, the longer the war goes, the more the strategic aims of the two countries prosecuting it, the U.S. and Israel, diverge. And one of the places I think you've seen that is Israel would like to take out all of their oil capacity if they can. In fact, they've targeted multiple aspects of their basically civilian economic oil infrastructure. After one big run of that, Lindsey Graham went on to Twitter to rebuke them for it, saying we want them to be able to make oil when the regime falls and have a flourishing and prosperous society. That also seems to me part of this trickiness, which is that the U.S. and Israel, I think, have different aims here. And if Donald Trump wants to cut a deal because oil goes over $5 a gallon in the U.S., gasoline, which I think would be pretty disastrous politically. It's not clear to me that Netanyahu wants to, or that he cares one way or the other.
Well, that's right,
$5.
because there's two issues here. Let's disentangle them. One is the economic dimension, and here you're quite right that on the economic dimension, the more the war goes on, the more the gas prices go up, the more this is bad politically for Donald Trump, the more it's bad economically for Americans. But Israel is basically likely to get another bigger check from the American government here to bail them out on this. So that's why those two don't diverge. But there's a second issue actually where even though Netanyahu, I disagree with Netanyahu's assessment. I realize he has a right to make his assessment of what's in Israel's interest, but here's why. Which is Israel has long argued that a good outcome here would be to cause a failed state in Iran, to break the Iran regime. But let's think about what that means right now. Iran has 1,000 pounds of 60% enriched uranium. It has 10,000 pounds of 5 and 20% enriched uranium. If you create Libya, a failed state in Iran, this is a country now with those thousands of pounds of enriched uranium, which could go anywhere. And maybe you'll even get half of it. You'll find half of it. But there's a real danger that is how you'll get a radiological bomb that'll blow up in Tel Aviv. It go through the Houthis, go through Hezbollah. You'll end up with some really bad stuff. It's basically a version of the loose nuke problem we had in Russia. But now it's with Iran. You've broken the state, but the state still has pieces. And what matters, what makes the most money? That enriched uranium. That will be worth 10 times the value of gold, and people will be willing to pay for it. So how are you going to get a radiological bomb in Tel Aviv to go off? This is the pathway I'm most worried about. So I completely disagree, and I realize I'm going up against the prime minister of a country, but I completely disagree. Not that Israel should exist. I'm supporting that. I believe that the strategy here is actually going to be undermining Israel's security.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that after watching what happened with Iraq and ISIS and watching what happened in Libya, that anyone could root for state collapse seems insane. I mean, particularly if it's the region of the world that you
and imagine ISIS with 60% enriched uranium and all the ideas there. I mean, my goodness gracious.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, all we need is one FedEx package come into, sort of different places. Just think about the possibilities here.
The other thing, I was talking to David Miliband on my program last night, a former foreign secretary for the UK and head of the International Rescue Committee. I mean, 90 million people live in Iran. I mean, some sort of state collapse would mean a refugee problem that would dwarf the Syrian civil war. I mean, by many factors.
Four times anyway.
Yeah, four times that, and that's, we all remember what the kind of reverberations of that meant for a bunch of publics and polities across the world, from Turkey, which took in several million at some point, completely changed and transformed Turkish politics, to Europe, to famously in Germany with Angela Merkel. I mean, and the wave of sort of right-wing reaction and populist xenophobia that was sort of
and also
stirred
just
up
look
by
right
that.
next door, Chris, to Iraq. Iraq is 40% Shia already. Why won't you have millions of Shia flood into Iraq? The Sunnis aren't going to like that. The Kurds aren't going to like that. So if you're talking about, remember the ripple effect of us invading Iraq, how we got the Syrian civil war was because we invaded Iraq. So now what we're doing is we're ignoring all of these dominoes again, and this is how you could really wreck that world's oil here for a long time to come.
So let's say I don't think the president listens to this podcast, but let's say he does, and he listens to this, and he decides to call you up and bring you in to give him advice.
Yeah, which I would do.
Is the advice,
which I would do.
Yeah, and the advice is just don't go up the ladder. right? It's just stop escalating.
Twofold. No, it would be twofold, and then I would be glad to try to be, more specifically helpful. But it's number one here is you're on the horns of a dilemma. You're at stage 3, and stage 3 here, you're about to go into Lyndon Johnson territory here. You're about to pass into this stage where there's ground forces. This could be leading to all these other risks we have just described. Now, when that goes belly up here, you're in Lyndon Johnson territory, which means your presidency is irreversibly sunk. And that will probably happen by the middle end of the summer, because then the Republicans are going to have to figure out, what are you going to do with this? It's just like Lyndon Johnson here. It was spring of '68.
Yeah, you run away from him.
Oh, my God. And then are you going to back J.D. Vance? This is all going to be here, but it's going to be a disaster there in terms of that. Number two, I would just point out here is that then it's back to the deal. What sort of a deal could you really cut? And the kind of price he would have to pay would be pretty high. He's probably going to have to end all the economic sanctions, probably have to pay reparations, $500 million at a minimum, those girls' school. Think about all that reparations.
Yeah.
And then number three, he's going to have to do something to constrain Israel from future bombing. Because if he doesn't do that, so what might that look like? It would be like Israel joining the NPT. Right now, Israel doesn't join the NPT. Israel wants there to be on-site inspections inside of Iran, but it's not willing to have on-site inspections in its country. So these are the price here. And I'm saying this is actually the low price. So this price is getting worse by the day, Chris. And this is what we're really talking about, the difficulty. And the reason it's good for the country here, because Democrats might say, well, wreck the Trump presidency. This is really a long-term disaster for the United States as we unfold. So we really would like this war to stop.
Yeah, I mean, my rooting interest here, whatever the politics, is just for the war to stop as soon as possible.
Oh, my God, without a doubt.
I mean, that's personally where I am. And whatever that took, even if it's him doing his own Mission Impossible stunt, he puts up a big flag and pats himself on the back for a job well done. I mean,
but our country will not be better off with $7 gas here going on for months. I was a young kid, but I lived in the 1970s, and there were 15% interest rates. So when you have these ripple effects go on, if he decides to take this through the summer, for instance, now you're talking back to 1970s here, and you'll start to see those coming out of J.P. Morgan and those assessments. They're not there yet, but this is why, as a country, we really want to get out of the escalation trap. It will be expensive for Donald Trump, but we really want to do that.
Robert Pape is professor of political science at the University of Chicago, where he specializes in international security affairs. He's, as you've heard, advised multiple administrations and written for decades on both air war and terrorism, as well as a whole bunch of other geopolitical issues. He's currently writing a Substack newsletter called The Escalation Trap. You can read more of his thoughts there. Professor, it's great to have you on the program. Thank you.
Fantastic conversation, Chris. The best. I mean, really, you're the best. This is just terrific.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That's very kind. Appreciate it.